sometimes you might think, I mean, and I guess this is kind of apparent, but sometimes failure is not your fault, or maybe not entirely your fault, and failure can happen in multiple ways. And sometimes you need to be careful because, some people internalize the failure and they think that it's like completely your fault. And sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times outside forces, maybe other people or the environment, or, like maybe, I guess what I'm saying is maybe what you did wrong was not so severe, but the severity was caused by something else. And the reason why it's important to recognize this is to give yourself confidence and not put yourself down, because sometimes you might think, wow, like I did something horrible. And sometimes people can trick themselves into thinking like that. And that can ruin your esteem, your self-esteem, right? Because you might think, wow, I can't believe. But really, when you think about it, sometimes uh, it's actually not entirely your fault. And be able to recognize that, be able to recognize, possibly what happened, that perhaps there were other forces that caused it. And so I guess that would be an example of something that's not fair, right? Because maybe that wouldn't have happened. But you still learned a lesson. And the lesson to be learned is that sometimes that happens. And is there a way for you to prevent that from happening next time? Because sometimes, the standards are just very high, right? Maybe in a school, right? If you go to a regular class, the expectations are not as high, but maybe if you go to a more rigorous and more challenging environment, maybe you go to a college that's more advanced. Maybe you're taking a much harder and challenging class. Maybe you're taking a harder course, and so if that's the case, you you're not going to, you would fail in where you might not be used to failing, and so you might internalize and think, it's, I mean, I guess it is your fault, but in a way the environment is more difficult. And so, take that into account. Does that make sense? But I think I'm talking more about, when things are out of your control, when sometimes, don't let yourself get put down because of situations where it's out of your control. So maybe the weather is bad, or maybe, whatever it is, maybe something didn't go to according to plan. That this often happens, in business, right? Where, you might launch a great product, but maybe it just launched at the wrong time, or, maybe the timing wasn't right. So it's not your fault entirely. Does that make sense? And so that having that understanding is important, because otherwise you might not realize when you have a good thing. You might not appreciate the good things that you have. And you also might not appreciate what you actually need to do. And so improve, because usually there are ways to improve what you whatever you did, to make it so that it doesn't happen again the same way if it were to happen to you again. Like, the whole looking back, the whole idea of, hey, let's see let's see what let's see what happens if, what if I do something else, right? Like, what you go back and you think, what could I have done to prevent this from happening? And so that's an example of, so understanding that, okay, some things were out of your control, but is there a way that I could have, prevented some of the things? that happened. Some of it, maybe not, but some of it, yes. And so take that into account, right? So, and let's say you're like studying or something, right? You're trying to learn something. The same applies, right? If you are maybe your method of you're learning something, but as you're learning, you're starting to realize what what is working for you, and what perhaps you maybe you're spending too much time doing something that might not be as effective. So, but you know sometimes I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes when failure comes upon you, you kind of are not you're unsure what sort of you don't want to get to a point where you want to try to understand and analyze what happened, right? And sometimes give yourself credit where you did things right, and then realize when maybe the environment was the problem, maybe the timing was wrong, but not necessarily your actions. Does that make sense? Or maybe your actions were not quite as severe enough to actually be a problem, but it was just a problem because of the circumstances, because of the environment. And so yeah, so I don't know if any of you have felt this way, right? Like, have any of you felt this way, or felt like um like this speaks to you? Like maybe you felt like you failed, but sometimes and this is an internal process too, because others are not, they don't see what's going on in your head necessarily, or at all. What they see is the outside result. And sometimes everyone is different. Some people, they some people interpret, obviously some people are going to be sympathetic to you, but other people, they might not care to be sympathetic to you. They might put all the blame on you, or they might not want to understand all of the circumstances. Some people see things very, in absolute ways, right? Some people, it's very black and white. It's very, it's either this or that. But, life is usually nuanced. And this video in particular is about those nuances, and recognizing that that it's not always a simple matter of, well, you did it, or you failed, that means you did everything wrong. Or usually there are many factors that caused it. And it's important to, I think, understand that hey, it's not entirely your fault, and that can serve as a consolation. And that usually isn't that it's usually not, it's hopefully, I should say, hopefully it's something that you could learn from, possibly, right? Because once you analyze your situation, you can finally start to perhaps correct and see if you could do things differently next time, so that it can be more favorable to you the next time. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.